Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and we are honored to have as our guest this week Shirley Hoogstra, president of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. Shirley has led CCCU for the last 10 years. They're an organization committed to advocating for and advancing Christian higher education. And I've invited Shirley to talk about her experiences at CCCU over these last 10 years and what she sees as the future for biblical and Christian higher education. So welcome, Shirley, and welcome to the show.
Phil, thank you for inviting me to be on the show. I count it a blessing anytime I can spend 30 minutes talking with you. So I'm glad that listeners can listen in because I just value your leadership. I value your friendship. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And when I became president of ABHE just about 4 years ago, you were so kind. You were one of the first people to reach out and welcome me to the position. And you've been a great mentor, showing me the ropes of what it means to run an association, as well as all of the inner workings of Washington, D.C. So I appreciate your impact on my life. So we have a bunch of questions that I want to work through as it relates to CCCU, your work there, kind of pull back, see the bigger picture of biblical and Christian higher education. Before we do that, so the audience gets a chance to know you a little bit, share with us a defining moment in your life that as you reflect back that you say, you know what, God really used that to propel me forward to where you are today.
I want to share with you about a mentor I had in New Haven, Connecticut. Just a little quick background. I graduated from Calvin University with an elementary education degree. And then after teaching for 3 years, I thought, boy, this is really hard work. I don't know if I can do this for a lifetime. I admire elementary school teachers so much, but I took a course, a master's level course at Columbia University, and it was called Law and Higher Education because I wondered if I wanted to go on to graduate work for higher education.
Right.
And sure enough, that law class was compelling. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm not going to do the higher ed part. I think I'm going to do the law part. So I stopped. I took my LSATs. We moved to New Haven, Connecticut. I went to University of Connecticut Law School. And my very first job out of law school was in a 17-person litigation firm, one of the best in New Haven and actually in Connecticut. And my mentor, think about this, it was like having a master teacher and an apprentice, was a man named Howard Jacobs. He was 65 years old. He practiced law well into his 80s. He was considered one of the best lawyers in America, just a fierce advocate for his clients and a person who loved God as a Jewish person and loved his family. So here I was, his apprentice, and it was just like you would read about in the books of old, where they would take you to court cases. They would help you learn how to take depositions because you were watching them. You were actually watching a master person. Well, this is really my first, I would say, job where I was working in a secular environment. So
Okay.
our law firm had Jewish, Catholic, non-believers, Christians as well in the law firm. And we sort of were mixing it up on how to be a multi-faith place. Howard was a very observant Jewish person, and his Jewish faith permeated how he did his work and how he treated his employees, with me being one of them. One of the things I learned from Howard was how deeply he loved his employees. And so Howard was so thrilled when young lawyers like myself would do something good. He would be like a person who would share, did you see what Shirley did? Did you see the brief she filed or the court case she won? And he would do this about all of his employees. He really loved his employees. And his motto that I have taken with me during my whole rest of my career, and I started with him in the 80s, and his motto was never miss an opportunity to celebrate. And it was an awesome way that he lived his life. And he was a generous, celebratory man about the things that mattered in life. He was supportive of me as a mother, as a wife, as a lawyer. He gave me a 2-year sabbatical during my law career there. And that was so that I could be a better mother to 2 small children, even though I was still involved with a law firm. But he made a way for me to be the best lawyer I could be and a person of faith, and how to be a person of faith with clients who were in trouble.
Wow.
So Howard was a gift to me from God. about how to be a professional in both a secular world and as a faith-based person.
Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it? That those of us who are in leadership, we don't pause long enough to celebrate. We are obsessed with what's next and are we moving forward? And okay, that's in the past, but let's keep moving forward and to pause. And what an example for you at a young
It was.
age
It
that
was.
then shaped you and how you run the organization to make sure
Yes.
that you're at CCCU and your academic experience, that you were
Yeah.
pausing long enough to celebrate and then move on.
Right. Completely agree with you.
Yeah, great examples from the Old Testament too about doing that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
For
Yes, of course. The
yeah,
Jubilee year,
yeah,
all that,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely. So
Feast, I think partly maybe is Jewish faith where they had
yeah,
all the different feasts
yeah,
and festivals and took time out of course, a very busy work schedule to
yeah,
observe all the Jewish holidays,
yeah.
which he did.
How about that? How about that?
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it.
You're
So
welcome.
let's get into some big picture of kind of what's happening in biblical and Christian higher education. So you've been at the helm of CCCU since 2014.
Mhm.
So that's you're wrapping up 10 years. Uh,
Yep.
what would you say, and knowing you, you're a humble leader. That aside, and probably not wanting to self promote, but I kind of want you to say
All
what
right.
are the top three accomplishments that come to the surface as you look back over the last 10 years of leadership at CCCU.
Well, the first one was I came in 2014 where we had a bit of a turbulent year before that, and I'm very grateful that the membership and my leadership team and the board chose me to be a leader who could stabilize the CCCU and then help it to grow and to find its new footing
Mm-hmm.
in this 2014 to 2024 decade, which has been actually described as the negative decade towards Christianity.
Interesting.
It used to be a positive Christianity culture, then maybe it was a neutral Christianity culture. But today, thought leaders have said we might be in a negative Christianity culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I count it really pure joy
Hmm.
to advocate for Christian higher education broadly
Yeah.
in the culture today because I think we are one of the more joyful aspects of the expression of Christianity. So that's the first thing I'm really grateful that today we are in a stable, growing,
Mm-hmm.
joyful place for Christian higher education as an association in the world. The second thing is, COVID relief.
Hmm.
So we all know in 2020 the world stopped in very significant ways, and here at the CCCU, of course, one of our prime values to Christian higher education is our advocacy work,
Right.
and we have many partners across the spectrum. And when the budget and the bills for COVID relief first came out, people may not know this, but there was nothing in it for higher education. Zero COVID relief for higher education.
Mm-hmm.
And so the CCCU and all of our partners here, ACE and NICU and so many other associations really banded together
Hmm.
to say, Christian higher education is an economic engine in almost every city in which we find a school. We are employers, and keeping people employed is really important, making sure that really millions of students are not displaced during
Right.
this. And we're going to have to help colleges and universities regroup pretty
Mm-hmm.
quickly and go online, and then all of the other things that came along with COVID relief. So, shepherding the COVID relief response in the government is a big
Yeah.
highlight for me.
And pause there because I don't think people realize the significant work that was done behind the scenes. Like you
Yes,
mentioned, these organizations in a time where literally physically things were shut down in
yes,
Washington, D.C., and trying to navigate that. And I know that you and others, Barbara from NICU, really worked
yes,
hard to advocate for our institutions. So your fingerprints are over a lot of how Congress responded and providing funding for our institutions.
right. And it was a lifesaver
Yeah,
for
yeah.
probably the majority of institutions because they had a pivot with loss of housing costs,
Mm-hmm.
because students moved home, and then we had a pivot around the technology aspects of being able to deliver online education for that time. Then remember all that testing
Yeah.
that had to go on in order for people to be back in. And all of our schools were able to open,
Mm.
except the ones in the LA basin because of California regulations. But all of the 140, except for a few in the United States, were able to open that September of 2020,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was it was an amazing thing.
Hmm.
The third thing, when I came in 2014, maybe a lot of people remember that the same-sex marriage case was decided by the Supreme Court, and they ruled that same-sex marriage was going to be an equivalent to heterosexual marriage. And that really changed the landscape of the law in the United States. And of course, Christian higher education, by and large, your schools and our schools have a historic understanding of marriage. And so that put us at odds, with now a new law. And along with that was a bill called the Equality Act, which had been introduced into Congress for 20 plus years,
Mm-hmm.
every year, which was an LGBTQ civil rights bill only,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that it only had provisions for advancing civil rights issues for LGBTQ people, but didn't recognize the religious liberty implications of that. So we all talked, 2015, 16, 17, 18, the Equality Act had real momentum following the Obergefell case in the Supreme Court. And so one of the first things that we did is our board said, how are we going to stop the momentum of the Equality Act, which would have really been devastating for Christian higher education?
Mm-hmm.
And we did. The Equality Act, it was not introduced again this year. We introduced what was, they thought, an impossible concept, which was that you could not have LGBTQ civil rights without looking at the corresponding religious liberty implications. And we believe that Congress would, in fact, see the necessity of adding religious liberty language to any kind of civil rights expansion. And one of the things that happened most recently was after the Dobbs case came out, LGBT community people were concerned that maybe the right to marriage was going to be also thrown out. And so Congress was going to pass a Respect for Marriage Act, which would solidify the ongoing rights for people who are already married. And so the Respect for Marriage Act included provisions for religious liberty. And so something that's looked like a pie in the sky idea in 2015, which was you can't pass LGBTQ rights without religious liberty provisions, came to fruition in the Respect for Marriage Act.
Hmm.
And that was because the CCCU is part of a large religious liberty coalition that made sure that the senators and representatives that were going to vote on the Respect for Marriage Act would also include important religious liberty provisions that pair fairness for all individuals within the United States. So our work around human sexuality legislation has
Mm-hmm.
been one of the key accomplishments for my tenure here. And just briefly to other things, I'm so
Yeah.
proud of our schools that are living in an increasing secular age, that they maintain their Orthodox Christian distinctives.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I love that. And then our advanced magazine, which at one time we thought, should we even keep a magazine? Do you make these decisions? And here in the most recent years, it's won 2 awards for being
Great.
a quality magazine. So, you have micro things and macro things, but what we know is God's faithfulness is evident every single day. And so I've been on a nice front row of a roller coaster, and I've seen God's work on behalf of the work that you and I do, Phil, be so fulfilling.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you painted that context of what you stepped into with CCCU, a
Mm-hmm.
rich history of engaging Christian colleges and universities, but trying to find that direction. And I think
Mm-hmm.
over a 10-year period, you've done a great job of providing that direction and moving things forward.
Let me say, Phil, on that, for our organizations, for any organization, it's your board,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in 2015, it was the CCCU board who said, we need to be at the table for all of these conversations. We can't just go hide ourselves and hope for the
Mm-hmm.
best. We're going to have to be engaged. And they were prepared to learn new skills for engagement across different denominational lines and different partners who we didn't agree with everything, but we agreed with some things, and that we were able to move business because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Takes a lot of work and building of relationships along the way.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise all of higher education is caught in pretty significant turbulence. And I think Christian higher education is, hey, we're guilty by association in that sense, right? We're part of the broader industry of higher education. So whatever happens at a national level has its trickle down effect to pretty much all sectors of higher education. But within our sector of the market, what comes to mind as some of the greatest challenges as you see us moving forward?
Well, the the narrative that seems so popular now is that a college education isn't worth it.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need one. You can look at these tech moguls and they didn't have a college education. Of course, that's like 5 people. And what the evidence shows is that a college education is the defining positive factor for a whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you more income over life, therefore you can do more charitable giving. It gives you more retirement options, therefore you can have a more secure retirement in the end, and it makes happy families. And what we hope, of course, is that people find Christian individuals who are going to be lifelong friends and perhaps even marriage partners in a college setting. So many positive things. So in that context, one of the challenges is to make sure that people understand the value. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
Dave Ramsey says, don't take out any debt. I disagree with him when it comes to Christian higher education, because you are forming lifelong Christian believers and then therefore cultural influencers. And the nation needs Christian leaders, and your institutions and our institutions are forming those leaders, and that is worth taking out reasonable debt.
Yeah.
And so counteracting the narrative that higher education isn't necessary is one of our challenges.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is we need continuing to go after the non-traditional student.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that there are fewer 18 to 24-year-olds,
Yep.
but there are 45 million Americans who have not completed their degree. So they've started college in some way. And how can we reach those 45 million Americans who would like to complete their degree?
Yeah.
So this innovation, along with valuing our historic distinctions, is always a constant challenge. And then I believe that the third one is that being light and life
Mm-hmm.
on topics that are controversial. Of course, Christians should have less fear and more courage because of who we follow and who livens our lives. So on racial reconciliation, how are we light and life on that content? How about human sexuality? How do we give an alternative to what is the promiscuous way people live today? Life and light. And then lastly, what about creation care? Right? How do we care for the creation that is so biblically motivating, so biblically underwritten in scriptures for creation care? How do we do these controversial topics in a way that pleases God and makes us ambassadors?
Yeah, yeah. And we're, as associations, we're one iteration removed from the front line of that, right?
Yes, that's
So
right.
we're not necessarily working with the students, we're working with the institutions that are working with the students. And that's again built around relationships and trying to encourage institutions to
Right.
to step into that space to have those conversations, because that's, you go back to the history of colleges and universities, that's where the conversations happened. That's where
Exactly.
healthy dialogue could happen
Right.
on these controversial issues.
That-
And we've just created, or we exist in a volatile environment where you can't have the space to have some
right.
of these conversations, right? People
Right.
draw immediate conclusions.
Right.
So in the midst of those challenges, and I know enough about you to know that you are an
I am.
optimist like I am, right? And I think some of that draws from our relationship with the Lord,
Of
right? I
course.
mean, that's our ultimate hope and joy. So within those challenges, what are the opportunities that you see that we ought to be embracing?
Well, if we did not have Christian higher education, you'd invent it today. And here's why. There is something called absolute truth. And of course, as we look around culture globally, we can see that when you have the absence of a belief that there is absolute truth and a moral authority, we run into problems as humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's been from the beginning, we run into problems as humans. So Christian colleges and universities base all of their teaching and their community life around this understanding that moral authority exists and we can access it for the good of our own personal lives and then for the good of the world.
Hmm.
So that distinctive and the way
Mm-hmm.
that is integrated into all of our faith and learning is just a tremendous offering to the world. We should never forget it, and we should always be confident about what we are giving and offering to the world. And the second distinctive and important aspect of Christian education is the fact that we should be courageous problem solvers and bridge builders.
Hmm.
So when we look around and we see the polarization, we see that people are not able to talk to each other, shouldn't Christians be able to model that behavior? Because Christ was modeling that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Zacchaeus, the Samaritan individuals, all of the examples where Christ as a bridge builder gives us the mandate to do that.
Mhm.
So that's where and of course, with every graduate, we've infused this courageous optimism about being a bridge builder is my
Mhm.
hope.
Mhm.
And so we are seeding the hope of a good future
Mhm.
by our graduates.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. There are a lot of key roles within Christian and biblical higher education. And I will
Yeah,
often say that probably one of the most difficult roles, and I think this is in any
it
industry,
is.
is to be a college or university president. And presidents face multiple fronts of stakeholders who are adamant on their perspective on how things should be. I mean, you just
Mhm.
start listing them of faculty, staff, students, board.
Yes.
That's all internal, graduates, alumni. But then you have local, state, federal accreditors, associations, denominations. There are just so many stakeholders that are involved with it. And in your time, even the last 10 years, and I've seen it even within ABHE, our average presidency is went from 8.6 years to 7.6 years.
Wow.
So it's definitely dropping, and the national average is even below that. So we're kind of seeing an issue there. What would you say when you're looking at the job of the president? What trends are you seeing that concern you? And then also, what gives you hope? How are you engaging this issue?
Yeah. Well, you've nailed it there, Phil. There is a leadership demand
Mm.
because the job is very difficult, time consuming, that associations like yours and mine and others need to make sure that we have a pipeline of ready leaders. Because the leadership of an institution, you can take an institution one way or the other so quickly. And where there used to be maybe an on ramp of where you could learn your job, and there was maybe some bandwidth for some mistakes. Boy, has that narrowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the day that you start your job is the day that you have all of these things cascading towards you,
Right.
and you have to have some expertise. So leadership development is one of
Mm-hmm.
the things the CCCU is very engaged in,
Mm-hmm.
as is your organization, and as many others. And I would really think that constituents have to be praying for our current leaders and then the next generation of leaders,
Yeah.
because that is a trend. Like you say, people are retiring, and we need to have the next generation ready. But along with that is ready and able board members. So often you'll see leadership troubles or failures. And sometimes you can look back and say, well, where was the board in that?
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure that board members are having good orientation, they're developing themselves, they're able to have enough time to read, study, and be ready for the meetings so they can make good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that I really love the new Evangelical Financial Commission Association, the EFCA, their new standards for care for the president. We really need to care for the leaders that are in these jobs so that
Yeah.
we can actually extend their
Yeah.
presidencies
Right.
and make sure that they have places to go when the pressure is tough, and they have good friendship sets and people are saying, hey, are you taking your vacation? Right. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to make sure that the pace and the scope of these jobs remain manageable. And then I would say that what I'm seeing, it gives me hope, is that I think leaders are aware of it and they're investing
Mm-hmm.
in themselves so that they can go the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
They're investing in their church communities. They've got a small group. They've often have a mentor group that is around them so that they can have confidential conversations. And that's
Yeah.
something that our associations provide to people.
Exactly. And I'm amazed that when I get on our college campuses and have opportunity to speak to presidents, they're just so hungry for just a safe space to be able to say, I'm struggling with this, and,
Right.
and am I alone in this, or is this something that you're seeing in a trend? And
Yes,
you can provide comfort. There's comfort in misery, or whatever that phrase is, right? You can recognize, okay, we're not the only ones that are
that's right.
dealing with this, that there are others that are out there. And then you can be solutions driven. The other thing that you said I really, really like, and I think it's a call to our presidents that are listening in on the show, is who are you developing within your institution?
Right.
And I understand that that's a tough thing, right? Because you don't want to create an environment of false expectations that if I'm investing in something, but I think our college presidents have done well to say, we're just developing leaders. We're not necessarily
Right.
saying, hey, you're going to be
Leave.
the next president, right? We're just creating an environment where you
Right.
can grow as a leader.
Yes.
That's so critical to do.
I think that's really stewarding
Yeah.
your role.
Yeah.
So I just had an excellent example. Joel Purcell, who's the president of NNU out in Idaho, he actually went to one of his key leaders and he said, I'll just use a pseudonym, Sherry, I think that you have presidential qualities. And I would like you to get involved with these organizations. I have to nominate you. It's very competitive. I've nominated 3 people. 2 of them have gotten in. I'd like to nominate you. So
Mm-hmm.
she has been in a whole 2-year preparation program about how to be a president and
Yeah.
find the areas that you're deficient in and get ready.
Yeah.
Boy, I think Joel is a stewarding leader
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as he identifies that next leader for a blessing in his campus, but also maybe a blessing
Yeah.
on another campus.
Yeah. And you can look back and see some of those college presidents who have invested in them, because the leadership teams that they had are now presidents of multiple
Yes.
institutions, right?
Yes, it's really
And
neat to see,
it
actually.
is. It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in the NFL, it's the coaching trees, right? Where you have a
Yes.
great coach and he had a bunch of associates, assistant coaches who are now major coaches, right? So it's that sense of
Yeah.
carrying on. And I do believe it is a stewardship and it is a
Yeah.
responsibility in the
Yeah.
midst of everything else that a college president does.
Well,
So
Gary Cook and
yeah,
Andy Westmoreland also
yeah,
have very big trees
they
where they
do.
have mentored people, and
Yeah,
Kim Phipps has have others.
yeah, absolutely. So CCCU is facing a leadership transition
Yes.
at the end of this year. You've led well. How is CCCU positioned as an organization as you retire
Yeah.
and a new leader comes in?
Well, what's been so exciting for me is to see how great our board has responded to this challenge, right? They were very gracious. They said, Shirley, thank you for, your service, and we understand what's happening here. And immediately they had a good plan in place. So we were able to talk it through with the executive team and then the full board. And then we hired Faith Search Partners in order to be the search firm. They decided on a great profile, and they have just been working seamlessly to make sure that they've got the ability to have a pool of people who are interested in this role that they can then have dialogue with so that they can choose somebody that can continue to pass the baton. My goal as a leader is really like a marathon,
Mm-hmm.
like a relay race.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of sprinting here still
Yeah,
because we got things that we have to finish, and I've got a baton out in front of me.
yeah,
And they are finding the person who's already
yeah,
running a race that says,
yeah,
I'm going to pick up that baton.
yeah.
And I think that that's great stewardship. So the number one thing is I'm so proud of our board.
That's fantastic. And it's the season of life that you're in too, to be able to say and recognize the fact that this is a stewardship. Like
Yes.
it's not, ultimately, it's not about us as leaders. It's about how we steward what God has given to us in the resources, because the next leader will come. But
I think it's a strategic decision for every present leader. I wanted to be able to retire when I still had gas in the tank. They say, that you
yeah,
have energy. Because I felt like the organization deserved to have a really good pass off, and that takes energy.
it
A good
does.
orientation plan. I've learned that from City Gate Ministries, how well
Mhm,
they did their pass off, and International or Prison Fellowship did a really
mhm,
great leadership transition. You had a really great leadership
mhm.
transition at BHE. So there's a lot of good examples out there, but I think it takes a leader in the spot to say, hey, I want to make sure that we have the energy to have a good pass off.
Right, right. Well said. Well said. Well, Shirley, we're coming to the end. We have 1 minute left. So I just want to give you an opportunity. You have biblical and Christian higher ed college leaders who listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
What's one word of encouragement that you want to leave with them?
Yeah. Well, I would like to encourage you with the verse from Romans that says, God is going to complete the good work that he has begun in you.
Hmm.
And the reason that I love that verse is because leaders often feel like all of it's on their shoulders. But what we know is that you have been put in place by a loving God who is also going to love you through it all.
Hmm.
and he is going to complete the work. And so we can relax in his arms, just being faithful one day at a time.
So well said. I can't even add a single thing to that. So, Shirley, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your ministry over the last 10 years at CCCU. And we're excited for you for this next chapter in retirement or whatever that's called. It's basically your opportunity to pick and choose what you engage with. And I think family is going to be at the top of that list.
Family and my husband, and actually seeing how God deploys next,
Yeah.
right? That's an exciting opportunity.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you again
You're
for
welcome.
joining us today.
You're welcome.
So until next time, stay kingdom focused.